I'll call the meeting to order. It's 5:30 on Monday, December 16th. This is a special public meeting of the School Board of the West Bend Joint School District Number 1. More than 24 hours prior to the meeting, notice of the time, place, date, and subject matter of the meeting was posted in each school building, the entrance doors at the Education Service Center, and at the West Bend Community Memorial Library. A copy was also sent to the Daily News, WBKV, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and other media sources who have requested notice of our meetings. Deb, can you confirm this meeting was properly posted?
Yes, it was.
Great. Please stand for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I went to the Packer game yesterday, and I don't know why I was yelling. I couldn't see anything from my seats anyway, but my voice is a little hoarse. But we have a quick meeting tonight. We do recognize a quorum. Nancy Justman and Tani Schmidt are excused absent tonight. So I'd like to ask Paul if you could be our acting clerk tonight.
Sure.
And hopefully you've had a chance to look at our agenda, and I will move to approve tonight's agenda.
Second.
Any questions, discussion on the agenda? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Public participation. Anybody wishing to address the board for public participation tonight? Seeing none, we will move on to our action items. You want to take us through these, Mr. Hanson?
Sure. So tonight's action items, all three of them have to do with compensation. We address them in kind of individual groups. So the first section is about teacher base wage negotiations and a resolution around that. The second one is around administrator compensation proposal for the 1920 school year. And the third one is around support staff compensation for the 1920 school year. You received some information in your packets ahead of time, so I'm happy to answer questions. Mr. Sarno and I engaged in 2 negotiation sessions with the WBA, had some very productive, respectful, cordial discussions, and while we weren't able to come to a full agreement, really had some very productive discussions between us. In terms of support staff, that would be the only other one that maybe has some unique elements to it. Really, the pay increases are the similar percentage for each of the 3 groups I discussed. But in looking at some of our support staff turnover data and retention data, there are a few categories of employees in the support staff area that we were going to address some wage scales in order to enhance our retention around those employees, as well as our ability to attract candidates for some of those positions. So I'm happy to answer any questions at this point.
The very last bullet point on that support staff talks about for cooks and high school cafeteria managers. Mm-hmm. Do we have middle school cafeteria managers or elementary school cafeteria managers?
So there aren't at elementary. Each level kind of works a little bit differently, and actually worked with Abby Padilla, who's the director of nutrition for school nutrition, and really looked at some job titles and things that are a little bit dated for the way that we operate now, especially after Silverbrook and Badger were rebuilt. They became very efficient spaces to work as a kitchen, just much more smoother flow of the work. So some of those positions don't necessarily exist anymore at the middle school level, for example. So we were able to kind of tighten that up and align it more with the way that they actually function now.
Okay. Any other questions on any of these action items? Go ahead.
I just got a quick question for Lenny, just to explain the negotiating process and
Sure.
maybe how many meetings you had.
So we had 2 meetings. They were recently. In the future, both Mr. Sarno, Mr. Kierkegaard, and I agree that we'd love to be able to move this earlier in the year. But with the late release of some of the state budget information, as well as Mr. Sarno and I coming into this role a little bit later, we had agreed with the WBEA that this later timeline would work a little bit better this year to have all of our information in place. We sit down with the WBA, we exchange proposals, ask kind of probing questions around those, have some discussion. They go back and work with their executive committee, we came back, we met a second time, discussed, kind of why we think each proposal, both us as well as the WBA, is what we think is best practice, and really just it's a great opportunity for listening. There is the opportunity for either side to change positions throughout that, but in the end, if there isn't a full agreement on a proposal, even if it's great productive discussion, which we feel we had, both sides then, in this case, agreed that we were at an impasse. They weren't going to move off of the proposal that they had presented, and we felt our proposal was appropriate. So we productively agreed that we probably weren't going to get any further, and therefore we proposed the resolution that's before you tonight, which both declares that impasse in the negotiations, and then it goes forth with implementing the district's compensation proposal.
Just one other quick comment. Lenny provides, or the office provides, all of the background information well in advance. So WBA will ask for a variety of different information regarding salaries and not necessarily proposals, but so it's not first time that's when they negotiate, the first time they see any of the information. They know in advance where we're getting our numbers from and what some of those other things are. And so even though there was only 2 physical face-to-face meetings, as much information as possible can be shared in advance as we can.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, there's a number of exchanges via email about different data inquiries they have ahead of time to make sure they have the information they need to put forth together a good proposal.
Okay. Just last question. Is there 1 or 2 payrolls left in the year, just at least the calendar year?
So next week is a payroll week. We are looking to have all of our retro pay and these changes put into place before January 1st to go out next week. I can't remember the exact date of the payroll that we're looking at, but
calculation of retro pay, again, remembering that this goes back, it dates back to July 1st or even September 1st then for the school year. But we would have a retro pay. Normal payroll is the 26th of this month, so we do only have 1 regularly scheduled payroll yet in the calendar year. But what we're working with is how we can get this calculated with payroll and determine those back pay amounts, get that on a supplemental payroll before the end of the month. And then the new pay rates would become effective then starting in the first January payroll. So there's not many penalties, especially since we're talking, you only cross fiscal years with the Wisconsin retirement system. Minimal because we'd be addressing it very quickly, but just a lot less paperwork that has to get shuffled and whatnot. So want to get it done as soon as possible. Don't jeopardize accuracy, get it done accurately and whatnot, but get it resolved here before the end of the year.
Actually, as long as you have the microphone, just to confirm, if these proposals are approved, are there any budgetary surprises? Are we within our budgetary means for the year? Could you comment on that?
Yep, everything that's presented tonight is within the budgetary constraints that we had passed back at the end of October.
Okay, thank you.
For asking.
So just circling back on the timing then, so next year, would it be envisioned that you'd start these conversations in November, given that we don't have final state numbers until October? Or would you actually begin even more preliminary conversations before that?
yeah, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, obviously, but we would love for people to come into the school year knowing what their rate is for the year. So if we did have some broad discussion with the WBA about the potential for that. Year to year, it's different. This, being in the second year next year of the biennium budget, Andy can speak about more, but that will help us because we know our position much earlier. But we don't like having to do retro pay if we don't have to. We'd love to put that out there initially.
Yeah, with the second year of the budget in place already, we know what it's going to be.
The state budget.
The state budget, that I'd like to think we could negotiate in April or May for the following year, and so that we could have, there's no back pay, there's no whatever. That's not true every year, but every other year it should be. So we think we can do that this next year.
One of the things I think our district has historically given teacher compensation increases prior to addressing other groups. So again, teachers starting first payroll of the year for them, September 1st-ish. fiscal year people in July. So, depending on when we're going to be able to meet with staff, I know Mr. Hansen's looking at a teacher comp model or updating and finalizing that information this spring. So I think we're just trying to pull all this information together. We did bring up being able to negotiate over summer because I've been in districts that they say, no, we're on break, we're not going to come to the table. They did express a willingness to be able to do that over summer here, so excited to be able to do that. So, but again, it might come down to timing that if we'd have a recommendation in July, but we don't act on all the other 12-month staff, how does some of that timing come into play? So a little bit of strategy and whatnot.
I move to declare negotiations with the WBEA, which is the West Bend Education Association, for the 2019-2020 at impasse, to approve the 2019-20 teacher base wage negotiations resolution, and to implement the district's teacher compensation proposal for 2019-2020. Motion and a second. Any further discussions, questions, comments? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. I move to approve the adoption of the 2019-2020 administrator compensation proposal.
Second?
Motion and a second. Any further questions, comments, discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. And I move to approve the adoption of the 2019-2020 support staff compensation proposal.
Second?
Motion and a second. Any further questions, comments, discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Motion to, I'm sorry.
That's all right. I move,
Go ahead, Chris.
I move to adjourn.
I'll second.
That's almost up.
Let's get inside.